So I'm thrilled to speak with you because your company was founded with this ethos of being a sustainable company, of having purpose at its heart. However, you were the first ever head of sustainability for the organization when you joined in about 2017. Where did you draw your inspiration as you were thinking about how to start this program from scratch, from zero?
Yeah, so I've been at Allbirds now for about 4.5 years, joined the company maybe 1 year into its lifetime, but I inherited so much when I joined. It was a company where our founders knew they had to do more than just make shoes, that there needed to be a greater reason for being than that at this day and age. And I think back in 2016, when they had this vision, they were a little bit ahead of the curve and really skating towards where the puck was going. And even so, my job was to take all of that ambition, the fact that the company was a public benefit corp, certified B Corp, and figure out how to harness that and turn it into an actual program with commitments and targets that would sustain for longer than the next 6 to 12 months. And it's both a gift and a really hard challenge to figure out how to start from scratch with just myself, no team. No one in the organization who knew anything about how to do this. And as we know, ESG and sustainability is such a broad landscape. It covers environmental, social, governance, but 15, 20 different topics underneath each of those. And so I think in terms of inspiration, the real challenge was to stay focused and to try to make sure that we had to stay focused to actually drive and have an impact. And I drew that inspiration from the founders and their real ambition and belief that climate change is the biggest issue facing our generation, and this mission statement that we have to reverse climate change through better business.
And you started with the product.
Yeah.
That is one of your products. I think I've seen her wear these shoes. But why did you decide to start at the product level, right? So some organizations would step back and say, oh, we got to put these big programs. I'm like, you started fundamentally with the products. Why?
Yeah. And I think that we were talking yesterday, it has to do with where I started even within the organization. As you think about building a sustainability team, like where does it make sense to report into? I was hired into the product team because as it became clear over time that product was really what drove our impact as a business. I think many of you have know, and we all have talked about that our product represents the vast majority of our emissions as a company. Not only is it the business engine and center of the company, but it is also what drives our emissions. And so it made sense for me to start
What
there.
percentage? Can you give a percentage?
About 90% is somewhat related to the product, whether that's materials, manufacturing, transportation, customer use, or end of life of the product. And so that was really the focus for the first couple of years and again, you kind of have to put your blinders up and stay focused on where the real impact and value is. The real focus was designing and building a way of developing physical products with carbon and trying to minimize the carbon footprint as the North Star in a way that now our design team and our product development team has a language for how to talk about low carbon footwear.
So share some of that language. So they're working alongside each other. How does that work? How does the process work?
Yeah, so as the sustainability person reporting into product, it meant that I was at the table with design and development and innovation, materials, saying, as we imagine a product, what do we think the carbon footprint's going to be? What are the levers we have to pull to bring it down? To the point where now today, I think everyone has a good sense of the lighter the shoe, the lower the carbon footprint, the less packaging, the less emissions from transport, the more we ocean ship, the lower the emissions will be. And now I'm actually moved over to report into operations because as we look towards the next 5 and 10 years, that's where the reductions have to come from logistics, from our factories. And so once we kind of got one thing under control, now it's time to follow where the impact actually is.
So what does it look like to have the entire company focused on sustainability? So it's in operations, but you have people who are in marketing, people who are in obviously logistics and so forth. How do you talk to them?
I think that's one of the core challenges of the job. And even within a company where all of the stars are really aligned, where we have the incentive structures, the investors on board, the customers who are buying this, the executives who are championing this as a core to our business strategy and value. What's hard is that historically sustainability and all these functions within a business don't overlap, that we're not versed in each other's languages, that the sustainability people are not business people and the marketing people don't know about sustainability. And so a lot of the job is just teaching and being a guide to help people who want to do the right thing learn how to do it. But that takes a lot of time and energy to figure out how to communicate in all these different languages.
Yeah. You mentioned your customers before, and one of the things that you did, I think, about 2 years ago, was to publish your accounting for each product. Like, so you focus on the product, so you publish the footprint of each product, literally.
Yeah.
And what drove that decision, and what also drove the decision for you to say, this is how we do it here? Here, world, you can do it this way too. You publish that methodology as an open source.
Yeah. So 2 things there. I think one, as we just look within our company, we have set a 5 and 10-year sustainability plan that we call the flight plan. We love bird puns at Allbirds. And under that plan, we've committed to cut our product's carbon footprint in half by the end of 2025 into basically zero, less than 1 kilogram of CO2 per pair of shoes by 2030. And we have a roadmap to get there. But, that's not a lot of time. It is a lot of time and it's not a lot of time. It's, presumably, I think what's so impactful about having 2025 targets is that I and our CEOs are conceivably still going to be at the company at that time, and we will be accountable to these numbers. And so publishing them on our shoe and updating them once a year so that you can follow along with us as we try to hit those targets is really important towards just making sure that we always have a fire under us to keep going. And then the more macro idea behind it is that we don't really understand the impact of the products that we buy as consumers. And that's in large part because companies aren't telling us. It's not information we're used to seeing. And while we expect to see calories on menus and we can compare calories in the aisles of grocery stores, we don't have that information for products. And so our idea is that we just want to start the conversation about the carbon footprint of the things that we buy, and not just on the magnitude of how much you emit as an American every year, but the pair of shoes you buy or the hamburger you eat for lunch, so that we can all just make more informed decisions. We're asking our customer to do so much and also rarely providing them the information to do that.
Now, one of the things that really struck me as well was the way that you use this for innovation, right? And I believe it's called Sweet Foam, right? Which is one of your big innovations, the soles of the shoes, where a lot of the footprint resides. Tell us a little bit about how that happened, and then again, open source. You open sourced that development. Why?
Yeah, so when we launched our shoes back in 2016, we have a big motto, as we all should, around progress over perfection. And what that meant at the time is that the sole of our shoe was a normal EVA foam made from petroleum. In service of our mission to reverse climate change, a big part of that is driving petroleum out of the apparel industry. And so we worked with a partner to create the foam out of sugarcane instead. And that's now what all of our soles are made out of. And when we did that, we wanted to make sure it wasn't just for us, that it could be used by any footwear, shoemaker, or car manufacturer. It's used in seats and cushions. And so it was available in open source. And I think the lesson to take away there is that at the time sounded very counterintuitive to normal business practices. You invent something new and cool, it differentiates you, you keep it for yourself, and you hold on to that advantage. But when you apply this long-term thinking lens of sustainability, actually, if we open source it and other footwear companies start using it who are much bigger than us, then one, it's greater impact for the world, but two, hopefully costs go down, and then it's better for us in the long run too. But I think to apply that long-term thinking really takes a lot of near-term courage in leadership to do something that historically people would kind of look at you sideways for in the business community.
Right. We're going to go to sidebar in one moment, but quick question for you before that. What's the hardest part of your job? What is the hardest thing you deal with?
I would answer that in two ways. I think one is just managing this rapidly evolving and very disparate landscape of ESG. Like in a given day, I have to do an LCA of a pair of shoes, understand how to treat a sheep humanely, know what to pay a factory worker in Vietnam, and what chemicals do and do not belong in shoes. And that's just like an absurd thing to ask of one person. So I feel a lot like Joel's video the other day. And so the hardest part is when you care about all of these things and you know they're all important and your stakeholders are telling you they're really important, is to stay focused on where you can have, with your finite amount of time, where you can have the biggest impact. And for us, that's really around carbon and around our products. The quick other way I'd answer it is this idea of being a teacher across the organization. And oftentimes in sustainability, we're asking people to do things that are harder, less familiar, more expensive, take more time. And so there's a huge amount of just emotional intelligence and people skills required to bring people along in that journey and to show them why it's all worthwhile. To Joel's point, I think it's every day is both wow, I'm so lucky to do this work, and it's really hard.
Yep. Deanna.
Yes, so we have a question for you. You've talked a lot about the values that you all have at Allbirds. How are you communicating those values to your supply chain?
Great question.
That is a great question. Yeah, I mean, and all of this, I would say, is I realize we're at an extreme advantage here because we are young, we have a blank slate, we have a very limited product offering relatively, and thus a pretty well-contained supply chain. Like, we know all of our factories very well. And so we can build these relationships over many years and communicate those values through visits, in both directions. And I'd say what's been really exciting is to see over the last couple of years this shift in balance, or in the asks that are being made between brands and supply chain, where I now have factories coming to me saying, we have a science-based target for 2030. What are you going to do to help us meet that target? Because the materials that you buy and use in your product count towards our target. And this unlock where now finally it feels like we're all swimming in the same direction with mutual goals that we're trying to meet, feels like it'll just accelerate change really quickly.
Great. One final question. So sad. What advice would you give to another organization starting from scratch, starting with a fresh blank plate?
I'd say my biggest takeaway from the last 4.5 years at Allbirds is the power of leadership. And this work is so hard that if you don't have leaders at the top who are willing to be bold and courageous, take a lot of the stands that Paul Pullman talked about yesterday, it's impossible to make change. And so, as I guess more from a professional and sustainability kind of looking to drive impact, it's find the leaders who are going to be bold and courageous and keep bringing your big ideas to the table. That was a big unlock that I've had in my time at Allbirds. Is I think I approached it early on. We were deciding to be a carbon neutral business. And I came to the table with a proposal around offsetting our transportation footprint because I felt like it was a quick win. I could show how easy it was, and then we could expand on. And our CEO just stopped me halfway through the presentation and said, "Why not the whole thing?" And I never came back with an incremental idea again. And I think that's all we can hope for here. And so keep bringing those big ideas.
Great. Hana Kajimura,